G'day Grumpies and welcome to another episode of Grumpy Old Bloke Goes Through His Vinyl Collection. Today we have a particularly interesting episode for you because the others were really boring. We're going to be there at the birth of metal. We're going to have morning tea with punk rock at lunchtime around about the 1980s. Before we slip into the early evening of AOR, we're going to witness the birth of MTV in the age of plastic, and we're going to finish before the dawn with some adult orientated rock. So stay with me. I hope you enjoy episode B2, which is the second half of the ancillary Bs. I know it gets complicated, but I think I'm making sense, which would be a first. So welcome to the episode, and let's kick off with the first B, which is going to be really interesting because I'm not allowed to show it to you. Supergroups. We've mentioned this a few times in this episode. Some are, some aren't. Is it really a term? I'll leave it up to you. But a very strong contender for the word supergroup would be my first artist. My first artist is also on an album that I can't show you. It was released in 1969. It's by Blind Faith, and the album is called Blind Faith. This is all of the album I'm allowed to show you. That's the back, which is pretty inoffensive. I'm sure you would agree. Now, Blind Faith consists of Steve Winwood, Eric Clapton, who I'm not a fan of, and that's going to be an interesting, contentious issue a bit later on. Ginger Baker and Rick Gretsch. They're the members of the band. And the track listing on this album, there you go. So the album comes in that rather contentious sleeve. It was re-released because there were a lot of complaints about the original album with just a band cover on the front, which is far easier to find. And as I say, not quite as contentious. This is on the Atco label, which goes to show it's an original 1969 release. Atco are part, or they are now anyway, are part of Atlantic Records. I think they're actually a spin-off of Atlantic even in those days. The album comes with an inner sleeve. So, well, not a sleeve, it's like an inner brochure with just the lyrics on the back, an inner sheet, I would suppose you would call that. And the actual sleeve of the record comes on a really multicoloured, bright sleeve like that. Now, for those of you who aren't aware of them, as I say, 1969, members of Traffic and Bread found themselves at a bit of a loose end and decided to get together and form a supergroup. They did record this album in 68, released in 69, and they did tour the album as well before breaking up. So it's a one-hit wonder of a band, but most of the band members went on to have reasonably successful careers on their own. I'll leave it to you to judge which one had the most successful career. But there you go, 1969, Blind Faith, can't show you the album cover. For those of you that are sharp on continuity, you will now notice that this is tomorrow and not yesterday when I recorded the rest of it, because I filmed this section and then I realised I'd had it on pause the whole time. So I've gone forward in time to record this section, and then I'm going to stick it back in time to make sure it all seamlessly progresses and you won't notice any difference in continuity. So today we do People's Punk, and by that I mean a band that were considered punk by many but weren't even close. However, they were a very popular band and a very good band at that too. The band is Blondie. Now here I have their second album, Plastic Letters. There's the track listing on the back, I believe. Or is it down the bottom? No, it's down the bottom. There you go. Professional as ever, even though 24 hours has passed. Blondie were a very, very popular band in the late 70s, early 80s. This was, as I say, 1977, this particular album. On Chrysalis, as were, I'm going to have to re-sleeve this, as were all of their albums, certainly all their early albums. I don't have a copy of the original Blondie. I must get a copy of that. This is, as I say, part of this journey is me finding what I need to go back through. Probably the biggest track on this one, let's have a look. On Plastic Letters. Yeah, Denis obviously was the first time I'd heard them, certainly. I believe Denis was released as a single in the UK and became quite popular, and then people realised that they had an album before this, Plastic Letters, and went back and got it retrospectively. However, their biggest album, I believe, was released in 1978, which is this one, Parallel Lines. This one would contain Hanging on the Telephone, Picture This, Sunday Girl, Heart of Glass. So this has probably got the most hits, for want of a better word, the tracks that most people would know. There's your track listing. The band looking very, very young. Weren't we all? When was this? 1978. Yeah, we were all pretty young then. So Parallel Lines, I actually have 2 copies of it because my original version, I didn't actually buy either of these new. So the first version I got was a little bit ropey, so I managed to get hold of another one which is in much better condition. Their 4th album, the 3rd one we've got here today, is from 1979. That's also American. They were getting a little bit poppy. This is what you were sort of going through their disco phase at the moment. This contains Rapture among other tracks. They were certainly playing up her blonde sexy image in order to sell records, although personally I don't believe they needed to do that, and I don't think Debbie Harry was particularly interested in doing that either. Inner sleeve, there you go, all the usual credits down the side, again on the Chrysalis label. There we go. And the final one of the 4 I have is their 5th album, Eat to the Beat. This is on a gatefold, which is very nicely presented. Certainly for the 1970, well, this was 1980, but only just. That's the back. As far as the track listing is concerned, there you go. They were considered by everyone who didn't know anything about punk as punk. They were the people's punk band, but they weren't that at all. They were new wave in the fact that they were around at the time that new wave hit. They didn't really seem to fit into any category, and the fact they were quite experimental with their style of music, going through sort of what would be pseudo-punk and stuff like Denis, and then the disco period, and then they're very poppy as well. So it was difficult really to put them into a box, which I've always respected to a large extent with any band being able to transcend genres. But for me, they were a good band that were around at the time of punk and new wave, but didn't really fit into either category. So there you go. That's Blondie. This is yesterday. No, it's not. It's tomorrow. I've lost track. Next album. Still in the 1960s. This time we're going back a year to 1968. We are at present at the birth of what many would say was the first heavy metal album. That and the Iron Butterflies in La Garda Vida is the other one that many people consider to be the beginning of heavy metal. Personally, I don't think there is a particular date when it started, but these bands were certainly influential. This one is Blue Cheer, Vincebus Eruptum. This came out in 1968, as did their 2nd album, Inside Outside, which I don't have, and this is not an original, this is a reissue. As far as the track listing is concerned, there you go on the back. How would I describe this album? It is certainly raucous. It has influenced, I would say, certainly heavy metal. It's influenced punk. It would have influenced acid rock, stoner rock, psych. It's an extremely influential album when you consider it came out in 1968 and people still quote it as one of those albums that influenced them. This particular version I have has nothing particularly interesting. It's just a single sleeve. It's on the Sundazed label there, as you can see. This particular version is on the Philips label, which is part of the Sundazed group. This particular version came out in 2009, I think I find. Yep, I liked, didn't I? And it's on white vinyl, as you can see. So I just got this as a tribute because I couldn't find a copy of the original. Well, I can find a copy of the original, but I'm not prepared to pay for a copy of the original. So there you go. Vincebus Eruptum, one of the most influential albums in music, full stop. A band with a little bit more punk cred from the late 1970s, although I'd still argue not. Were they punk? Oh, yeah, I don't know, it's a difficult one. Boomtown Rats, Fine Art of Surfacing. Now, this contains the track that everybody knows by Boomtown Rats, which is the reason I've really got this album. I was never really a huge fan of the Boomtown Rats. They were another band that were on the periphery of punk. But, you know what, I just can't deal with Geldof's voice, to be honest with you. I find it just dystonic and uncomfortable, but yeah, good songwriting, but they weren't. I don't really. That was the only album I have by them, so that probably says everything. I don't have any of Bob's solo work. Here is the inner sheet as well. Comes with it. It's not actually an inner sleeve. It's just a sheet. Oh, you guys will want to see the track listing. There you go. It's quite bright. It's a lovely looking album on the Mercury label. There you go. So we're sort of heading in more to that sort of 70s punk new wave area, whereby a lot of it was all about your image and your credibility rather than your songwriting skill or your ability to play your instrument necessarily. But I think the Boomtown Rats were a rarer commodity in the fact that they were quite good musicians. And I Don't Like Mondays, as you'd all be aware of, was probably one of the first songs of that period from that genre that actually had several layers to it. It had orchestral arrangements and changing and timing and stuff like that. So it moved beyond the straight, 3.5 minutes, 4 minutes of 2-3 chords being banged out and shouted down the microphone. So I sort of respect where they sit in that whole pantheon, but as I said, can't really listen to them now. We jump ahead now about 7 years and a completely different style of music. This is one of the guilty pleasures for blokes of my age, and I was there when they came out and I saw them live way before they became big, so that's just my little excuse there. Anyway, the album that I bring you is Bon Jovi by Bon Jovi. This is the first album. It came out in 1980. No, a lie. This came out in 1984. The original band members on the front there and the back. I don't know who the bloke on the front is. I know. But the blokes on the back I know are in the band. This was their very first album, as I said. I absolutely love this album. It contains Runaway, Roulette, She Don't Know Me, Shocked, all those tracks there basically. Let me try and put that into focus for you. Now this album came at a time when hair metal really wasn't a thing. I still don't like calling them hair metal. They were just an AOR band. They were an 80s rock band, for want of another word. Here's the inner sleeve. All the lyrics on there. And a picture of the chaps on the front there. If you don't know who the chaps are, then you're probably not a Bon Jovi fan, though I don't know how many of you are, or at least would admit it in public like I do. This is the original British copy. I bought it when it came out on the Vertigo label. There we go. So nothing particularly flash about the packaging, but I have to say I'm a closet Bon Jovi fan for the early years, but they lost me a little bit later. But for now, I'm well on board. When you make a big splash with your first album and you're highly promoted or highly sought after and get radio play, it's very difficult. That difficult second album syndrome, I call it. 78,000 Degrees Fahrenheit is an album which most critics hated. Didn't actually. It's probably their least popular of the early releases. However, I love it. I think it's, if not their best album, frankly, but I like to be contrary. There's the track listing for you on the back. I mean, Hardest Part is the Night. Tokyo Road is on there. I mean, it's a damn good album. I thoroughly love it. Inner cover, inner sleeve. There you go. Lyrics on the back. Also on the, if you want me to get it out. Do you want me to get it out? Okay, I'll get it out. On the Vertigo label for you. There you go. So, an absolute classic album, and that came out the year after, so that would be 1985 by my calculations. And that whole acceptance of rock was just being played on the radio, and that's always a good thing. I mean, a lot of people slag off of bands like Bon Jovi and that ilk, but you're getting people to listen to rock music, and someone who listened to Bon Jovi in those days may have ended up listening to Metallica. They may have also ended up listening to someone like Miley Cyrus, but we can't have everything. So I thought that album was particularly good. I really enjoyed that one. The other upside to liking Bon Jovi in that period is, of course, girls like Bon Jovi as well. So you could actually go to concerts with girls. Who'd have thought? Who'd have thought that was a possibility? But it was great. It was a band that you could actually listen to with your girlfriend. In 1986, they hit pay dirt. This album, Slippery When Wet, by far and away their biggest selling albums when Bon Jovi became a stadium band, for want of a better word. There is another cover of this, which was, of course, banned in the UK. It showed a lady in a swimsuit or a car wash or something like that, I seem to remember. And, of course, she could see her nipples. And Americans don't like that sort of thing. It's okay to see people murdered, but we can't see any nipples. So There we go. That's the back cover. The track listing, if you don't know the track listing to this album, you'll know just about every track on there, because I think every track pretty much was released as a single. As I say, they were in Stadia at this stage. I first saw Bon Jovi. I was trying to remember who I saw them with. I looked back through their tour schedule and I saw that they were touring with Kiss, so I definitely wouldn't have seen them there. But I seem to remember I saw them. I know I saw them at Donington before they headlined. I can't remember who else they toured with. Maybe it's the Scorpions or something like that. Anyway, Vertigo label, as all of their early albums are, and the inner sleeve, fairly straightforward, just a lyric sleeve. There you go. I have to say, it's a brilliant album. It's a masterpiece of rock at the time. I think Bon Jovi, probably Def Leppard, they were the sort of bands that were really melodic, a little bit more intricate in their songwriting than a lot of stuff had come before, and not so cheesy, such as the bands like Warrant and Poison that were around at the time, which I really couldn't have a bar of. So yeah, that's a very solid album, and that was followed up 2 years later by New Jersey. Now, New Jersey, I think, took sort of less of a teenage testosterone album. This was a little bit more adult in its style. There's the track listing for you on the back. From there, Lay Your Hands on Me is an absolutely brilliant opening track for any album. Bad Medicine, Born to Be My Baby, Living in Sin. Yeah, these were all a little bit more, I suppose, a little bit more adult orientated. I suppose they were less cock rock and more, I don't know, soft rock, for want of a better word. Inner sleeve, picture of the boys, and some album notes down the side, lyrics on the back, and oh, is it on the Vertigo label? It is on the Vertigo label, only by then they were so big they had their own Bon Jovi Vertigo label. All of these are the original UK releases. And I saw Bon Jovi live a number of times, and they were always excellent live. From this point onwards, I started buying CDs rather than vinyl, because vinyl just wasn't available, and at the time we all thought, well, CDs are the next big thing. Unfortunately, they were, but not for very long. I'm very grateful for that too, because I never really wanted to stop collecting vinyl in the first place. So from this point, my Bon Jovi collection goes CD. But that, I think, for me, New Jersey is pretty much their last classic album. After that, for me, it started to drop off a little bit, and they started to disappear up their own backsides and take themselves a little bit too seriously. Just my opinion, and this is my show, so I'm allowed to have it. Now, in 1976, going back to that period of time, which seems to be, we've dwelled there a little bit today in B, there was two very distinct movements happening. Obviously, punk underground was beginning, as well as some early new wave and that sort of stuff. But at the same time, in the classic rock area, one guy, Tom Scholz, locked himself in his room for what seems like ages. I think it was a couple of 3 years, and wrote an album and played every single instrument on the album in the recording of Boston. This came out in 1976. And is, in true words, an absolute classic. Not a bad track on this album. This will be a 10. There is the inverted commas band on the back. And the band had to be put together for touring reasons, because once the band Boston had been signed, the band Boston, which was Tom Scholz, had been signed, they needed to go on tour, so he had to recruit other musicians. Fortunately, one thing Tom Scholz didn't do is sing. I say that unfairly. I've never heard him sing, so I don't know if he can or not. But he did have to recruit a proper singer, and that being Brad Delp. And Brad Delp had one of the most amazing voices in rock. Powerful, emotive, soaring, and oh wow! Even to this day, I hear him on some of the songs on this album, and it still brings you to tears. More Than a Feeling You'd All Know, Peace of Mind, Foreplay, Long Time, Smoking, Something About You, Let Me Take You Home Tonight. Absolute classic, 1976. It's on Epic. So the album itself is pretty unremarkable, just a blue Epic label. As I say, 1976. This is the British version, which is part of CBS. I'm sure you'll know that. Don't really care. Now, Boston, by the time that first album came out, the second album was pretty much ready. The second Boston album, Don't Look Back. Now, for me, Don't Look Back and More Than a Feeling, the first and second Boston albums, are effectively Boston 1, 2. It's a double album because you can move seamlessly between them and play them in reverse or in random order, and they all sound like they go together. There's your track listing. No, it isn't. I lied there. There's your track listing on the back. There we go. If you can all read that, I'm sure. For me, Brad Delp's voice on A Man I'll Never Be just absolutely makes me tingles down the spine and the hairs on my arms stand up even now. Would this be a 10? Oh, it's probably a 9.5. So absolutely fantastic. It's a gatefold sleeve. There we go. The boys at their best. Just absolutely wonderful piece of work. In the sleeve was lyric sheet, which is rather nice, and on a standard epic orange label, again British version. Amazing piece of work by Tom Scholz, who's a wonderful guitarist. As some of you may know, Brad Delp died a few years ago. It's not something I really want to harp on about the death of musicians on this channel. He died by his own hand after a long battle with depression. And I would just like to say at this point in the program, even though I don't want to get too serious, that reach out to your friends, make sure everybody's okay. Depression is a killer. It's a silent killer, and most people who have found out that someone has died by their own hand as a result of depression almost always say, "Oh, I didn't see anything wrong with me. It seemed fine to me." Just reach out. Boston's third album, I think we had to wait many years for. From memory, just didn't come out. 1986, so nearly 10 years after the release of the first album. So I'm assuming some of that had been contractual, some of that would have been Tom Scholz trying to be a perfectionist, as he always was, trying to maintain the standard, and he certainly did. This again is a brilliant track. There's there's your track listing on the back. I think the problem with this, it came out too late after the other two. I think they'd lost a bit of the momentum. It's a lovely gatefold. And it fits very well in with the canon of the other two. But as I say, it's been such a long gap. 10 years is a long time for any band not to bring anything out. And I think they sort of lost their momentum a little bit. There you go, inner sleeve. She's very nice, and all the lyrics on there. And by this stage, they'd reached the stage whereby they had their own bespoke label. There you go. So Boston again. I think this one's on MCA, which I'd have to look up if they're part of the Epic recording group as well. They might well be. So there you are, one of the greatest groups of the 1970s. The next four albums, I think you'll agree with me, are eclectic. The first of which is an album which I don't particularly like, and it's another album that I can't show you the cover to, or at least can't show you all of it. The reason I can't show it to you is the same reason as before. It has an underage lady on the front. Here we are. This is Bow Wow Wow. The cover is actually a pastiche of Manet's Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe. And apparently it's okay to paint nude ladies, but not actually have photographs of them. But as you can see, there's the band. On the back, I'll hold it carefully. There we go. That's the back of the album cover, and there's the bits and pieces, track listing. Now, why do I have this album? This album is interesting. The reason I bought it is because of its place in the canon of new wave and punk and whatever you like to call that period. This band was formed after the Sex Pistols broke up by Malcolm McLaren. Malcolm McLaren actually persuaded the Ants to leave Adam. So this is essentially Adam and the Ants without Adam, and you can tell very much that Burundi beat that the drummer uses. I can't remember the drummer's name, my apologies. Barbarossa. The beat that you hear very much on Adam and the Ants, early stuff you can hear here. That's the sort of his trademark. So this contains three ants. The other member of the band, Anna Lewin, joined 6 months later at the age of 13. Mr. McLaren had no interest at all in being controversial. Also, for a short time, she was joined on vocals by another contemporary, one George O'Dowd, who went on to form a band called Culture Club. Will there be any Culture Club when we get to see? Well, no. So anyway, that album's quite important when it comes out. It came out in 1980. The reason I got it, as I said, is because it was so influential in the whole history of what was going through music at the time, and new wave and everything else, and Malcolm McLaren's influence on the music business, the emphasis being very much on business. We're back into the 1980s, the mid-1980s now, and this one is going to come completely out of left field for those of you that know me. This is something none of you would expect me to own. The reason for this is Annie Nightingale. And those of you who don't remember Annie Nightingale, she was a DJ who played our Sunday show after the charts were on a Sunday on Radio 1, which is about the only choice you had when I grew up. And Annie Nightingale used to have a show after that on Sunday evenings where she used to play stuff that was really sort of up-to-date and modern but wasn't really hitting the charts at the time. And I was driving to and from London for work at the time and of a Sunday evening and got to listen to quite a lot of this album. That album is The Age of Consent by Bronski Beat. Not an album that is typically my sort of taste, but I have to say this is a classic. For those of you who don't know, Bronski are a dance band, I suppose very much in the mode of early Depeche Mode or what else was around at the time, Eurythmics, that sort of stuff. Jimmy Somerville had a falsetto voice that was just off the scale, absolutely amazing. This is the inner cover, lyrics predominantly and usual credits. The tracks on here most people would know would be Why, Small Town Boy, which is the track that got me. Not really understanding homophobia even as a young male, so in the early 80s I was in my 20s. Never understood it. What was the big deal? Just, live your life and enjoy it. And, my opinion hasn't changed after all these years. And listening to the words of that track really got me, even as a straight male in the 1980s. I thought, what's this all about? Brilliant song. And also I Feel Love, which was originally a song by Donna Summer, which Bronski covered with Mark Almond of Soft Cell. So a very interesting eclectic mix. It's a dance album, but it's very poppy, very 80s. There we go, and the inner sleeve. There we go. There's the album itself. There we go. So look, I love this album. I don't listen to the whole album very often, but certainly Small Town Boy and Why still get a spin out from time to time if I feel that I'm needing a little bit of a lift, a little bit of a bop and a little bit of style by step. So there you go. Didn't see that one coming, did you? Now we're into the 90s, early 90s. And for me, one of the greatest albums of all time came out in 1994. That was this. Jeff Buckley, Grace. This is a 10. If I have to explain why it's a 10, then you need to go and listen to it. There's the back cover. This is a 2013 cover of it on 180 gram. I bought it originally when it came out on CD, of course. You couldn't, vinyl really wasn't a thing then in the mid-90s. It all but faded out. So I've bought this more recently, as I say, on 180 gram vinyl. This is the inner sleeve. There you go. I don't think I gave you a close-up of the lyrics of the track listing, did I? So there we go, that's your track listing. And there's the little cutout of the bits and pieces saying that it's a reissue on 180 gram vinyl. Does 180 gram vinyl make a difference? Some say yes, some say no. I don't know. If you've got good hi-fi equipment, it probably does make a difference. Personally, I just think it feels like a more quality product, sort of thicker plastic. It just feels a little bit more substantial. There you go. Nice and straightforward album, not repackaged in any way with any flair. This is just as the album was. But Jeff Buckley, Grace, just an absolute classic. I was fortunate enough to see Jeff Buckley. I'm not too sure what year it was. I think it was 96 at Belvoir Amphitheatre in Perth. It's an open air bowl, a bit like Milton Keynes Bowl in the UK, something like that. Near a winery as well. What else would you expect in Perth? And it was just one of those wonderful and lovely, perfect evenings. It was warm. It was probably in the low 20s, top teens. A beautiful, clear night. People were lighting candles. People were drinking wine, having their picnics. And Jeff Buckley just came on. No real flash show. It was just just the lights and the music, and he just played an absolute blinder that night. It was almost a spiritual experience. The guy was that good, and to lose so much talent so young is just one of those absolute heartbreakers. He made one of the world's greatest albums of all time, and then unfortunately was taken from us, but thank goodness we have this to remember him by. If you haven't listened to Grace before, I strongly recommend you do. If you haven't listened to it for a while, go back and listen to it. Truly, this is a 10. It's amazing. Now to a band that have been around for a very long time. I think since the late 60s, early 70s. I think their first album came out at the same time as the first Black Sabbath album came out. So it would have been 1969, 1970. Also a British band. They're from Cardiff. And this is them. This is Budgie. Budgie have 11 studio albums. This is their 10th. This was 1982. I'm sure you've all heard Bread Fan, which was covered by Metallica. Budgie were also credited with influencing much of the new wave of British heavy metal. I missed out. I don't know what it is. This is the only Budgie album that I have. I admit I haven't put a lot of time into them. I wasn't particularly grabbed by them. They've never really caught my attention. Although on paper I should really like them, and they should be a bigger part of my collection. So anyone who's watching this, if you're into Budgie, can you maybe send me the 3 albums you suggest I listen to, or maybe 10 tracks that I listen to, in order to really get a good taste and a good sample of what Budgie were all about. However, this was 1982, as I say, the 10th album. There's only one more album after this on RCA. It's a standard RCA, is either blue or black label. I can't tell because I'm told that I'm colourblind. So that one is Deliverance from Evil. Yes, it is. Deliverance from Evil, which is all about the power struggle between the East and the West, which was going on in the 1980s. And for those of you that were around at that stage, I think you know what I'm referring to. They were worrying times. There was so much happening in the 70s and 80s musically. The music was probably, for me, at its most diverse and most challenging. From the AOR, from punk, hair metal, dance music, everything really was in a mishmash at the time. One of the most interesting bands to come out of that period may not be many people's favourite bands. However, you cannot deny their influence on music, or on video more specifically, is this, the Buggles, The Age of Plastic. This was released in 1979 with Jeff Downes and Trevor Horn. Both of whom had been on the musical scene for quite some time. They only made 2 albums. This was the first. The second one came out in 1981, but wasn't as successful, and pretty much that was the end of the show for them. However, those of you that are, shall we say, a little bit more serious into your prog, will know that Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes, when the Buggles split up, joined Yes. And as a result of their joining Yes, the album Drama was recorded, and for many Yes fans that really was the end of, well, certainly interregnum for Yes, and it wasn't very popular. Having said that, Trevor Horn then went on to produce 91025 and Big Generator, which were the 2 albums that followed that by Yes, and arguably their biggest selling albums of all time, so what can you say? However, this was the original version. Professional. This was the original version. This can annoy some people because they don't know which way to show it. But that's Jeff on the back. That's Trev on the front. The inner sleeve is just a standard lyric sheet. There we go. As far as I don't think there is actually a track listing here. You'd have to read through the track. But let's be honest, everybody knows one track on here, don't they? And it's on Island Records. Now, as I say, this came out in 1979, and I felt it was such an influential album that when in 2019 they released an anniversary version of it, a 40th anniversary of The Age of Plastic. This came out, I bought it. So here we go. This one came out in 2019. It's the gatefold version. Exactly the same track listing as before. It's on 180 gram vinyl, so a little bit weightier than the original version, and on clear plastic, which is rather cool. So I thought, as a note to an album which was incredibly influential, whether you like them or not. Still in the 1970s, only just 1979, although this was probably released more like 1980. We go to some what I would call more authentic punk, although this is a best of album essentially. The Buzzcocks, Singles Going Steady. This essentially is a compilation of their of their singles, funnily enough. I was a big Buzzcocks fan at the time. I've got quite a few of the singles, although I couldn't afford to buy albums in those days, and was fortunate enough to see them live a number of times as they toured quite extensively earlier on in their careers. Here is the track listing. Essentially, there's two sides to the album in two ways. Not only is there a side A and there is a side B, there's a side A of tracks that you've all heard of, and side B there's tracks that only the hardcore and very few of you would have heard of. Other than that, it's a pretty straightforward album. There's nothing really to it. It's on the Liberty label. This was released in 1979 according to the label, although I don't think that's true. There you go. So the Buzzcocks, a proper punk band. I'm not afraid to admit I was wrong, but when this next artist first made an appearance, and what a major appearance it was, I just wasn't sold. I thought it was all hype and all imagery and wasn't really a great deal to it, despite the presence of Dave Gilmour. However, I've come to reassess my position later in life and decided that, yeah, I was wrong. This is Hounds of Love by Kate Bush, which in my opinion is her best album. I say that because it's the only studio album by Kate Bush I actually own at this stage, and I am actually planning to rectify that by going back through the back catalogue. So anyway, this came out in 1985. It's split into two parts. You've got Hounds of Love on side one, and side two has always been called the Ninth Wave. Is that right? The Ninth Wave, my apologies. I'm not really sure why that is the case, so if anyone can inform me, I'd be really interested. But track listing, as you can see, is there. You'd all know many of those tracks. It's an absolute beauty. The inner sleeve is pretty much a continuation of the front major cover, but does actually contain the lyrics for, sorry, I got my hand across it there, contain the lyrics for it. I think from memory it's on EMI. Yes, it is on EMI. There you go. Pretty straightforward album as far as the packaging is concerned, but an absolute classic by Kate Bush. As I say, I was wrong. I was very late coming to Kate Bush, and I have to wear that. So in penance, I bought the 25th anniversary version of it as well, to sort of assuage my guilt. This came out beautifully packaged as a gatefold, which essentially is the, as you've just seen, the inner, what was the inner sleeve there. In a gatefold. Nothing other particularly flash about the packaging other than this beautiful speckled, I don't know if you can even see it, I'll pull it out so I can see what I was doing, it would help. There we go, it's a speckled perfectly pinky version, so really pretty. That's the 25th anniversary, came out in 2010. Hounds of Love, this is the 25th anniversary version. This is the original version, came out in 85. Great album. Would find a place in anybody's collection. Now I've got to go back and backfill the earlier albums. The last album in today's episode, and the end of the Bs before we get into the box Bs, is a beautifully packaged and very special album. It's called Before the Dawn. It's a recording of Kate Bush live in concert in Hammersmith in 2014 after a 35-year absence from the stage. So this is an amazing piece of work. This was released in 2016. This is a booklet that comes on the inside, as you can see. I can't really show you too much on here. Oh, excuse me. As everything with Kate Bush, it was a monumental production. The album itself is 4 vinyls. They all come in their own little package. This is Act 1 with the track listing on the back. Every one of these albums comes in a slipcase like this inside of the inner sleeve, and they're all on the Fish People label, which is Kate Bush's own label. So that's the first one. Act 2. There's your track listing. Act 3, Part 1. Track listing. And Act 3, Part 2, or Act 4, as I would call it. Beautifully packaged. There you go, and that's your track listing for that. So playing on stage with her was a host of session musicians, all of which are incredibly well credited in their own rights. The actual band was referred to as the KT Band. That's the full listing in the outer slip box, as you can see. Kate Bush, the KT Fellowship, Before the Dawn. So Kate Bush playing live in London the first time in 35 years in 2014, just to prove she hasn't lost a thing. The whole theatrical experience is caught here. I actually don't know if it's available on Blu-ray visual. I imagine it should be. I'm going to have to look that up, actually. Thank you again. You've just cost me more money and more homework that I have to do. Anyway, that's the last one in this little collection. So thank you for bearing with me. B's taken a little longer than I'd anticipated, and we haven't even finished it yet. So the next couple of episodes are going to be specials. I'm going to do a Black Sabbath special coming up really soon. And then I have a 3 box set David Bowie mini series coming out, so I'll do each box set one at a time. So look, thank you for bearing with me. I'm really enjoying going through my record collections. I hope you are too. Please press all the buttons downstairs, because it does help me and does support me, and a little bit of encouragement, and I'd love to hear from you guys. As I say, I'm trying to build up a community of music lovers and record collectors here, that we can share our thoughts and our loves and our dreams. Well, maybe not that. Our thoughts and about our collections and our taste in music together. And I'd be really interested in any comments of any of the stuff that I put up and any controversies I may have started. And I've only just scratched the surface of controversies that I can kick off. So look, thanks all very much for staying with me. Stay grumpy, and I'll see you all soon.